right, we are streaming and now we will record. All right. Oh, of course. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SIFWA's Comics Chats for December. I am really excited today. We have a wonderful guest. We have Blue Delliquanti. Welcome, Blue. Thank you for coming today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Jessica and Tim and everyone. I'm really excited to get to present. I'm going to be spending the time today talking a little bit about the history of online comics. For a little context about who I am
Oh,
and what
I'm
I,
sorry. Let
what's
me do
up?
an intro. Let me do a proper intro.
Oh,
I,
sure,
I
sure, sure.
accidentally said, I just said hi to you and I want to give you, no, no, no. I
Sorry.
realized I was like, I want to do it. No,
Go for it, go for it.
no, we're so excited to have Blue. So Blue Delliquanti is a comic artist and writer who teaches comics courses at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. From 2012 to 2020, they drew and serialized the Prism Award-winning science fiction comic Oh Human Star, which is so good. I just had to add that.
Thank
Um,
you.
you're welcome. Blue is also the creator of graphic novels like Meal, Across a Field of Starlight, and Adversary. They have just been so generous with their time and agreed to join us today to present, as Blue already said, about the history of webcomics, online comics. I am so excited to go on this fantastic journey with you, Blue, and now I'm officially going to hand it all the way over to you and disappear for a while.
Awesome. Thank you so much for facilitating this. I appreciate it. So, yes, I have that introduction. Let me tell you a bit about how I have presented this in the past. As mentioned, I am a graphic novelist who started in the online comic space. I've been actively making comics since 2012 and made a webcomic for 8 years. I also teach comics at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and this presentation is actually something that I had put together for a class over there. So I've tweaked the presentation a bit for this audience, but to give you a sense of the original audience, I may be describing things that are history for the original audience, but you have lived through. I appreciate your patience with that. Similarly, if you hear about comics concepts that you would like to ask more questions about that are unfamiliar to you, please feel free to ask them about the Q&A. I understand that sometimes it can be a little insider baseball, but I really love the field of online comics, so I love talking about the history of them. So, why don't we start with the conditions that led to the development of the online comic space? First of all, online comics communities are very much indie comics communities. They exist in this landscape that goes beyond what we typically think of as traditional comic spaces, your Cape Comics, your Marvel, your DC, etc. And in the pre-internet world, the communities that would flourish during those times were still very much being developed. And a lot of these were through print spaces, such as small presses, APAs, which stand for Amateur Press Associations. A lot of these would be zines and collected anthologies of comics work and illustration work assembled by groups. And this became a space for a lot of subcultures that would thrive in webcomics proper. Most famously, the furry community came out of these APA spaces, but many, many other communities that didn't necessarily have a place in mainstream comics would develop there. As for internet and online comics communities themselves, this formed through the limitations of what internet access or pre-internet access looked like. Prior to the full development of online networks, most people who could access online networks at all were tied to organizations with the technology to host their own networks, primarily universities. College students or people working in large organizations were primarily the only ones with access to online networks. So that was how a lot of webcomics emerged. Before the World Wide Web, webcomics looked a very certain way. And again, this is a technological limitation that can be easy to overlook if you aren't necessarily seeking it out, which is the ability of browsers to display images as we know it. Early online service providers, browsers could not display JPEGs, could not display GIFs. If you were going to access images at all, you had to just download them directly to your personal computer and store it on your own. You couldn't access them through the browsers. So that was how primarily early online comics emerged. The big thing that I want us to take away from this is that what is considered the first webcomic, such as it is, which is by an artist named Eric Milliken, is considered lost media. There is no trace of this thing. Eric's other work still does exist in some capacity, but the first example of this art form is considered lost. In the 90s, the mid 90s, the development of the World Wide Web changes the game significantly. The thing to keep in mind here, and again, this is something that I typically explain to the college students that I give this presentation for. It helps to have that distinction between what we call the internet and the World Wide Web, which are often conflated. The internet is the system of computer networks that are linked by telecommunication infrastructure. It's the physical infrastructure that allows images and information to be shared. The World Wide Web is that collection of documents and resources that are accessible via the internet. And those are the things connected by hyperlinks and other tools. So the analogy I like to give is the internet is the road system, and the World Wide Web are the houses on the roads. They're the things that people want to get to, but you have to get there via the roads. That's a helpful distinction. The Flashpoint Flashpoint year that the World Wide Web really takes off is 1995. The year prior, in 1994, there were about 3,000 websites, and in 95, that exploded to 23,000. And we start having people making web comics that in a lot of cases are still running. Kevin and Kel, which is on the screen right now, to my knowledge, is still running, which is a huge accomplishment. But a lot of the cartoonists who are doing comics at this point were experienced with syndicated comics, say in newspapers. And a lot of these are college newspaper contributors, et cetera, who are experimenting in this space. Here's a couple other examples. David Willis, someone I've met, nice guy, still contributes, but his first experience was in his college paper. 98, 99, this is when genres and tropes start to emerge that we often associate with webcomics. The one that I always talk about is the genre of guys on a couch playing video games, which has a robust place in the online comic space, pops up in the late 90s. Other things to keep in mind is that obviously the internet has a lot of resources for people to share work from outside the US or Anglosphere as well. Scanlation groups become huge in the 90s. This is basically groups that form to unofficially translate and distribute comics. And I say comics, I definitely mean manga, but this was something that was distributed through internet relay chat channels, as well as free web hosting services that were popping up at the time. Think your GeoCities, think your Angel Fire, and this is a tradition that still exists to this day, even as the North American access to the Japanese comics market has become more mainstream. This is still a very robust online series of communities. Early 2000s. At this point, the comics presence online has gotten significantly robust, which has allowed for a infrastructure to form. This is something where I should say up front, everything that not every comic that we're going to be talking about is science fiction based. I would say there is a significant proportion of them that are speculative fiction, but there's a lot that are all kinds of genres and all kinds of audiences. I'll also point out ones that I think are particularly influential or interesting. Achewood is kind of a great example of this. Achewood, for people of a certain demographic online, Achewood changed people's vocabulary, and it's a really interesting one to find. But at this time, um, because the internet had proved to be a valuable tool for providing access to comic work, a lot of indie cartoonists who had established a career for themselves in print would often resume serializing their work online and experimenting with the capabilities of the space. Some names that you might be familiar with who made this jump include the Folios, Carla Speed McNeil, Scott McCloud, who, if you are in the comics academic space at all, you know that name. You've probably read Understanding Comics, and you may have read Making Comics, his most recent. I keep calling it his new book. It came out in 2005, which is more of the Here's How You Make Comics book. And then he also did Reinventing Comics, which nobody read, which is kind of a shame because I feel like one of his most interesting ideas came from Reinventing Comics, which is the idea of the infinite canvas. So McCloud had this observation that when we typically think of comics, we are thinking about them on paper, right? We're thinking of them being limited by the boundaries of the page. And so everybody is forming stuff through that page. But he observed that a browser window is less of a page and more of exactly that, a window. It's a window that you can move up and down across the boundaries of a canvas that, based on your technological limitations, could go on essentially forever, basically as long as your space and RAM permitted. So that was something that he observed early webcomic artists experimenting with. The one on screen right now is from a one-off story by Drew Wine called Pup Contemplates the Heat Death of the Universe. It's awesome. Track it down. But this was something that he paid attention to and gave a name. Similarly, at the time, this was something where portals and sites for comics collectives began forming. A lot of these are names that I will just kind of browse by. We don't have to go all into all of them in depth. I may draw attention to a couple of names of folks who got their start in comics and then became uh, more well known for other interesting projects along the way. Folks who got work put their work on the webcomic portal Keenspot include folks like Chris Straub, who may be better known these days for his work on the series Local 58, as well as a little creepypasta story called Candle Cove. Ian Jones Cordy is in the animation industry these days. Was a showrunner for OKKO, but there's lots of really interesting folks who made work at this time. There also kind of became a culture of reading webcomics that if you had an office job in the early 2000s, you probably had friends send you or link you stuff from Perry Bible Fellowship, Get Your War On. This was something that was starting to develop its own culture beyond the bounds of what comic artists could expect at the time. Other webcomic collectives include Dumbrella. R. Stevens and Jeffrey Rowland got their start in there. There's a couple of others, The Duck, Smack Jeeves. One interesting one is the family of websites that are known as Modern Tales, run by Joey Manley from 2002 to 2012. This is another thing where the infrastructure of the internet formed an interesting component of this. So at the time, again, if you were experiencing websites in the early 2000s, you probably remember this. A website's popularity is hampered by its bandwidth costs. So a webmaster can be hit with high costs if they get unexpected high traffic. Say your thing was linked on Boing Boing. Remember boingboing.net? If you got a lot of incoming traffic, that could lead to an unexpected cost for the webmaster. What Modern Tales did was it would feature several comic artists with a collective model that would allow artists to work together, boost each other's visibility while making work that was kind of offbeat or experimental. It was originally a paid subscription model, but as online advertisement rates, that's a tough word for me today, the archives became free. It peaked at a little over 2,000 subscribers and grossed $100,000 per year, split between the participating cartoonists. So you were not fully making your living off of this, but this was nothing to sneeze at. Artists that came from this collective, some other names you might know: Ryan North, we'll get back to him, Matt Bors, Raina Telgemeier, Spike Trotman. Some of these offshoot websites include Girl-O-Matic, which is specifically prioritizing female artists and audiences, stuff that were experimenting with infinite canvas. And something that it also implemented was a technology called RSS. This is, again, something that I often have to explain to college students. RSS is a web feed that lets you access website updates in a single aggregator, so you don't have to constantly check all your bookmarks to see what's updated. It's a really handy tool. Some other names that have popped up that would go on to do other things: Kazuki Uishi, Faith Aaron Hicks, Control Alt Delete by Tim Buckley got famous in some internet circles. Jeff Jacques, Dave Malky, Ursula Vernon, lots of people who are doing really interesting work. So I'm blasting through all these. The things that I want you to start paying attention to now are the social media sites that were popping up at this time. Over time, as social media platforms became used, this shifted the way that people access to these websites, and frankly, just access the internet in general. So we have Facebook launching in 2004. In 2005, that's where we get Reddit. We have some other big hitters of the webcomics world popping up in the meantime. Randall Munroe's XKCD, Gunner Craig Court by Tom Siddell. 2006 to 2010 is another era. It's funny calling these eras because in the long run, these are such small moments of time, but there really are some like significant impacts in how these individuals are developing their craft, distributing it, getting cultivating an audience. But it also reflects a lot of changes in how the internet is operating, how people are accessing things that I think are worth drawing attention to. 2006, we have the launch of Twitter, and some other folks. We have Tracy Butler's classic Lackadaisy, which I believe still has a really robust following to these days. We also start having Korean comic artists to publish work online and get international acclaim. We will get back to that as well. But I would like to talk about how people were developing their careers and making a living through webcomics at this time. And there is a really, really interesting role that Ryan North, who I mentioned earlier, whose name might be familiar to you, started in 2006. So at this time, to make a comic and to make a living making webcomics, you were basically selling t-shirts based on your stuff. You were probably doing a job on the side. As banner ads and ad revenue started to become a more viable way to make income, that was something that you started seeing on more websites in general, but specifically webcomic sites. You could, in practice, make a living from running ads on your websites, generating somewhere between 15 to 20K a year if you had a modest following. The downside is that at the time, because much of the content of a web cartoonist website is images, it's difficult to have that contemporary ad software read sites like that and get a sense of what the website has. So the cartoonist has little control over what ads run. Irrelevant or inappropriate stuff can find its way onto the site. So Ryan North basically developed a system called Project Wonderful in 2006 that allows web cartoonists to advertise on each other's sites in what we would consider an auction system. This is something that was primarily focused towards web cartoonists, but lots of self-publishers and people running indie businesses could participate in this as well. Essentially, webcomic sites could auction an ad space on their page. The highest bidder would have their ad displayed. And a bidder could set limits on the amount of money they set aside for a particular bid. So you could put down, I don't know, $5 to have an ad run for an hour. But if you timed it correctly, say on 9 a.m. on update day for a particular webcomic, you could get a lot of eyeballs to your website. And that was how a lot of newer cartoonists could develop their stuff. And that was a way to generate a lot of readership for new folks. Keep an eye on the clock here. I'll speed through a little bit more. 2007, the year of Tumblr. People were also developing their own webcomic merch businesses in that collective model. 2008, we've got work by Casey Green, Yuko Oda, Anant Hirsch, people who are still active today. 2009, Kickstarter, One Punch Man, The Oatmeal, Homestuck, words, titles that might be familiar to you. Let's take a quick sidebar with crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is a big game changer in the world of any kind of independent businesses and self-publishing, but it was kind of a big deal for the world of webcomics. One early adopter is Spike Trotman of Iron Circus Comics. She developed the library of Iron Circus by crowdfunding print runs of anthologies and webcomics. She's been doing this for like basically 15 years now and established the model for doing so in the indie comics community. If anyone has more questions about how this is done, I've been in the Iron Circus orbit for a while, so I can provide more information about that during Q&A. I'm just being mindful of time. 2010, we got Instagram launching. E.M. Carroll has a really interesting presence in terms of horror webcomics. Jillian Tamaki. Let me see if there's any other notes I want to contribute here. Let's move on to the next era, such as it is, which is the period between 2011 and 2018. Because all of the major players in the social media landscape have been established by now, this fundamentally changes how people are accessing websites, finding updates to things, and cultivating their communities. We still have people who are serializing work and finding audiences that way. One thing that has become notable of this time is that a lot of folks who may not have been able to find success in the mainstream, cartoonists of color, LGBT cartoonists, just people whose work is more niche or more marginalized than the economics of mainstream publishing might allow, are able to develop a really significant readership and a dedicated audience. One of them was me. In 2012, I started my webcomic and I was able to cultivate a readership of my own in a way that just I don't know would have been viable, even 5 years earlier, let alone 10. It is funny when I first put together these slides and I saw what else was being launched in 2012, including Nimona. I had major imposter syndrome. What I prefer to think is that this is a really cool snapshot of how people up and coming were developing stuff at the same time. But, the juxtaposition is funny to me. Let's see. We have lots of people who are coming up with more collective sites. A contemporary one at this time is Hiveworks, that are starting to reach into the print paper book space, publishing stuff, displaying at conventions, going outside of purely the digital. Other names that you might recognize their work, if not their names, Sarah Anderson, Ngozi Ukazu. In 2013, this is a year where I think a lot of interesting things happen at once and is sort of a flashpoint in the webcomic space. We have the sunsetting of Modern Tales due to the founder Joey Manley passing away. Another significant sunsetting moment is the shutting down of Google Reader, which was the most popular RSS feed aggregator at the time. I have a feeling many people are still quite down on that still, but it reflects a shift in how people are experiencing online content. Patreon launches, which is another crowdfunding tool that allows people to sustain individual artists' work. This is something where webcomic artists do quite well. Jeff Jock of Questionable Content is still number one. The Nib is a first foray into nonfiction and comics journalism founded by Matt Bors. And listen, if you know about webcomics at all, I will also draw attention to the fact that one of the most well known images on the contemporary internet was posted at this time from Casey Green's Comic Gun Show. If you've seen the dog and the cup of coffee, you know what that looks like. But I like to tell people who made it. He is also a nice dude. I've met him a few times. This is also, of course, going outside of the Anglosphere. Webcomics models are changing other comics tradition as well. In manga, after surprise hits like One Punch Man, mangaka are able to start leverage mainstream success while operating in Japanese language spaces, like Pixiv is often a big one, though Twitter still gets used frequently. And that gives them an alternative to that traditional serialized print manga model. We also start seeing a further development of the Korean webtoon space with Naver Webtoon. I will give a crash course on this. Essentially, the webtoon medium, which is comics that are using that infinite canvas to scroll as opposed to go a page by page format, they allow a lot of readers to keep up with their favorite titles on their phones as opposed to with a desktop computer. And that tradition allows for a really, really interesting space in webcomics right now. A lot of series are developed by teams as opposed to individuals. There are regular and extensive updates that become an expectation for the audiences of the medium. Adaptations, like film and TV adaptations, are also huge in a way that may have been unheard of for North American webcomics. In South Korea and elsewhere, that becomes quite common. But that access into the Anglosphere becomes more common at this time. In Gozi Yukazu, I mentioned earlier, so I'll skip past that. This is, you can tell this is where I start running out of stamina making these slides. There are just so many interesting titles happening at this moment that it's tough keeping track of them all. Two titles in this period that I do invite you to learn more about, just in terms of their impact and experimentation. It goes without saying, Lore Olympus is a big one in terms of audience accessibility. This is probably one of the best known English language webtoons that are in the space right now. I do also want to shout out one called 1770-76, which is a really interesting work made by someone who is not a professional comic artist. John Boyce is a sports writer. I believe he originally serialized this on SB Nation, the website SB Nation, but he did a lot of really interesting experiment with video, with GIF, with Infinite Canvas. That is it's a great way to spend an afternoon, is sitting down with 1770-76. And it's sci-fi. It's a really great sci-fi story. I recommend it. I'm going to breeze through this because we're getting short on time, but essentially Project Wonderful shuttered in 2018 for a couple of factors. Social media platforms made it less likely for people to just go and check on websites, instead just getting their updates from social media posts themselves. Ad blockers also contributed to it. But so Project Wonderful was also had its downfall accelerated by individuals exploiting that auction model that Project Wonderful practiced. I can talk into this a bit more in Q&A, but this is essentially not how webcomic people make their living anymore. Let's talk about what's been happening the last couple of years. As being online has become more of a essential way of being a science fiction author, of being a creator of any kind, being a cartoonist. There are a lot of things that have become mainstream about the format. They're both exciting, but worth paying attention to. First of all, mainstream publishers have been taking advantage of this model. DC in the US, also Japanese manga magazines like Shonen Jump, they have started accessing digital platforms to distribute digitally exclusive releases in webtoon format, making use of that IP with any format that has been legitimized. Webtoon is a powerhouse of the medium right now, is also much easier to cultivate a global audience beyond North America. If you are an indie cartoonist, you can have your work translated in multiple languages, adapted in other media. There's a lot of growth happening there right now. Um, there are comics that have started serialization on social media platforms themselves, as well as opposed to their own websites. Two that are doing really interesting things right now. What Happens Next by Max Graves, not sci-fi, but just good. Um, Lots of manga, like interesting manga titles, have been started as essentially Twitter threads. Now, the thing with that is that they often need more permanent homes eventually, and that's something to keep in mind if you are making a comic right now. Don't have it live exclusively on social media. Other things that artists are doing, they're still experimenting with digital native media, and the options for that are broader now. Scrolling comics, obviously, people incorporating GIFs and video, metatextual social media accounts, like for characters or for the world that they are developing in, is very, very interesting and exciting. Also, a lot of growth in the visual novel space and companion games, something that are comics adjacent, but often benefit from the creator's experience with the comics medium. Really great stuff happening in the visual novel world right now. Also, there is a growing tradition of digital comics festivals, especially post COVID. That has allowed for authors to distribute their work digitally first, as opposed to like meeting in a in-person space. This also allows for organizers who have a great curatorial eye to spotlight work from creators in the Anglosphere, but who are maybe outside of North America or outside Europe. Shortbox Comics Fair is a great example of that. There are lots of artists featured who are based out of Indonesia, who are based out of Egypt, who are based out of Finland, who are making some of the best work, especially some of the best spec fic work in comics right now. Shortbox Comics Fair this year, my favorite piece is from a comic artist in the UK called Dead Horses. Her name's Freya J.N. Dead Horses is essentially what if Roadside Picnic was cast with Catgirls. It is the most striking, interesting science fiction thing, or one of them that I've read this year, and it's on these digital comics fairs. Finally, some other things. Well, not finally, we got a couple more slides after this. Something to keep in mind is that credit card processors have been increasingly dictating what kind of work is distributed and sold in online platforms. This has often been leading to deplatforming of marginalized artists, undoing a lot of the accessibility that online work has permitted. Lots of creators have been trying to take matters into their own hands when platforms behave in ways that they don't like. This includes deplatforming, adoption of blockchain and AI technology that is unpleasant to individual artists, to say the least. There's also been a reaction to the bottleneck that's often caused by social media platforms. So there's also been a return to what's considered like old-fashioned internet resources, newsletters, web rings, ways for creators to share their work after completion, and also just having their content on their own terms from personal websites. That's been the main thing. Let's see. We can talk about the transition into the graphic novel space, people starting in comics. This is just a like slideshow of some of these names that started in web comics and now are much more significant names in spec fic, in kids graphic novels, etc. The main thing that I'd invite you to take away is the ability for experimentation with online comics and doing things that just can't be done in print. But there are also things to consider, especially with the longevity of the medium, which is basically the conservation of media. Um, a interesting case of this is with a what I could honestly like unironically consider one of the most influential online texts of the last 2 decades, which is Homestuck by Andrew Hussey. Again, I say this completely unironically just because of the influential impact this media has made. This is something where it uses a tool that is no longer accessible or active in contemporary browsers, which is Flash. when Flash was discontinued, Homestuck was something that could not be accessed anymore or viewed in its original form. So, in addition to things that are already kind of an issue with online resources, which is like the degradation, link rot, things becoming inaccessible over time, if they're not accessible by the Wayback Machine, you're just out of luck seeing stuff at all. There's also a aspect of digital media basically being preserved through the passion of their audiences, if they can be preserved at all. Homestuck is quite lucky in that its audience is very passionate. They were able to basically archive the full content of it as best they could after Flash was discontinued. But again, this is something that is has a whole giant audience behind it. The question I would like to invite you is, if you had a webcomic that was really important to you, whose website is no longer accessible, if the JPEG hyperlinks disappear, who will continue to archive and circulate those works that were meaningful to you at an important age? And more importantly, will they have any institutional support? This is something that I encourage people to start thinking about as comics become a big part of mainstream culture, but also online comics become a really important core memory for people's development of reading comics and becoming a comic reader. This is a lot of information, I know. I had to do a bit of a brisk version, but I invite you to ask questions and give me a chance to build on some of these ideas in the Q&A. Thank you very much for listening. That's the end of my slideshow.
That was amazing. And it was a lot of information, but
It was a lot of information.
so much great stuff. And I know that our membership appreciates this, especially this kind of dive into the history of storytelling, the history of how do we, keep it alive and not lose our history and not lose these things that were so important to us, which is so true across all digital storytelling. So thank you so much for that. Before we stop the recording in the stream, I want to give you a chance, Blue, to let people know where they can find you and what's your latest
Yes.
project. Yes.
So, I am finishing up a book that will come out through First Second in 2027. I can't announce it yet, but keep an eye on that from me. Otherwise, you can always follow what I'm doing by looking me up, Blue Delliquanti. I'm most active on Blue Sky. You can find me on Tumblr. I never left, baby. But if you'd like to read the entirety of my online comic, Oh Human Star, its archives are free and available on ohhumanstar.com. You can find it there. I hope you enjoy reading it.
Okay, once again, I just want to thank you. I'm going to stop the recording and